That was so beautiful. And how many of us sang that as children or growing up? Yeah. And I remember we used to sing it in Sunday school, and I used to take a neighboring kid who was in kindergarten. And my cat's name was Terry. And when we got to the line, "The joy we share as we tarry there," he would look at me and grin because he knew the song was really about my cat. That Jane Elizabeth Hart talked about when she was here, how when she was little, 4 years old, her grandmother, who was married to a Methodist minister, used to play that on the piano, and she'd sit on the bench next to her and sing that part about he walks with me and he talks with me. Afterwards, she said, "Grandma, God's going to talk to me. God's going to talk to me." She truly believed that. And her grandmother said, "Yes, dear, that's just fine." And then she went and told her parents that. And they put up with that for a few years until she reached about second or third grade. And then they put her straight that her job in the 1940s was to be a wife and a mother, and God doesn't talk to people like you and me. That's just in the Bible. And she was very dutiful. She was a good little girl, but she rebelled. And her rebellion, a lot of us went out and smoked cigarettes in the back. Well, her rebellion was that she knew God was going to talk to her. And she wasn't going to let anybody stop her from that. There's that part of you, that innate part of you that knows that you're connected. Did you feel that as a child? Could you feel that you were connected as a child? My mom told me when I was 4 years old, I told her I was going to be a minister. I remember being 10. And I've been spending the rest of my life playing that out. I remember going to Unity Village when I was 19, spending the day with James Dillett Freeman, asking him if I could work at Silent Unity and go into ministerial school when I graduated from college. And all these things. And it's been a lifelong dream. I'm talking, however many years that is, over 60 years. And now I'm letting it go. That's a chrysalis that I'm coming out of into what's called retirement, not because I want it to stop, but because the next step of spiritual development requires it. How does the next step of your spiritual development require you to take a step into some unfamiliar direction? To come out of the chrysalis and say, where am I? What are these? Oh, I've been beating against this chrysalis for so long that I built up some muscles in these wings, and now I can fly. I want you to take this analogy and plug it into your life circumstance. This is not about complacency, but about radical acceptance of a new possibility in the midst of where you are. Radical acceptance, it's not complacency, it's not standing in the middle of the interstate and just letting somebody run over you. It's not passivity, it's not giving up. It's a radical engagement that does not demand that the circumstances change for you to experience what you need to experience. You are being tumbled and polished. I am being tumbled and polished. Together? I am being tumbled and polished. And once I went through a time in my life, maybe 30, 40 years ago, where it required me to radically engage with acceptance. Radical acceptance. And I thought, well, what's all this I'm dealing with? And I got, you're being tumbled and polished. All the rough spots. All that rough stuff, diamond in the rough, where it was being tumbled and polished. And then I read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's, she founded the hospice movement, her autobiography in which she said, I was tumbled and polished when after World War II, was one of the first people to go into Bergen-Belsen and to deal with all of these different experiences, which were so troubling and so difficult for her. But she said, I realized it was there to tumble me and polish me and to bring out new possibilities, new characteristics, new qualities of being. I am being tumbled and polished. Together? I am being tumbled and polished. And so for you, how do you interpret this in your life? How did it show up for you last week in the hurricane that didn't hit us? It did hit other people. We hold our hearts open and we take the actions that we can take to support. But we also understand that there's a spiritual component to this. As there is in everything, it is tumbling us and polishing us. And we got the benefit, the spiritual benefit of the experience. Every one of these experiences is designed, custom designed to grow us spiritually. Every one of these experiences is designed to grow you spiritually, and your job is to not resist, but to open up to the possibility and to move with that possibility. You know, the second most famous thing in the Bible from Jesus was, after the Lord's Prayer, was the Beatitudes. But what's the Beatitudes? Blessed is this and blessed is that. And it really means, oh, how great it is that this happened. And oh, how great it is. And more than half of those things are negative. How can that be? It reminds me of Edwene Gaines 40 years ago telling me when she went through a tough situation. She said, you know how I got through it, Greg? Everything that happened, I just said, God, that's great. Together, God, that's great. And literally, the blessed are this and this. It literally translates God, that's great. But more than half of it, it's things like being persecuted and reviled and lied about. I mean, all these things. How can that be great? How can that be great? How could Friday be good? And yet, in the middle of the dark ages, somebody had the presence of mind to say, this is a good day. Doesn't look like a good day to me. And yet, what is that about? Well, if you engage with radical acceptance the circumstances of life, you can work with them and change them as you need to, or work through them, or whatever you need to do. And it's no accident he knew Good Friday was coming. What did he do? He threw a party on Sunday, Palm Sunday, and then he threw another party in midweek, which was the Last Supper. And he did that why? To raise the energy, to lift the vibration. What are you doing to radically accept the circumstances of your life, not being complacent and passive, not just lying down and taking it? That's not it. That it's not fighting with reality. Radical acceptance is truly the point of power. It's accepting things as they are and recognizing this is what's going on and this is what I'm going to do about it. And everybody in this room got their heart pierced, their consciousness pierced in this last week. Because let's face it, when you were looking at that thing swirling and the number was 185 miles an hour, it did something to your consciousness. It did to mine. I looked inside myself and I said, hello, Daffy Duck. Bouncing off the walls, Daffy Duck. And so what did I do with Daffy Duck? I journaled him. I journaled it out. I journaled out my feelings. I moved through it. What am I feeling? Okay, terror. Oh, what is the false belief? That I'm going to be destroyed. And what's the true belief? Nothing can destroy me. When I recognize, all those people that talk about near-death experiences are telling the truth. I believe that. All of my spiritual experiences, yours too, where you feel there's something real that doesn't require you to be in your body. So you say to yourself, well, if worse comes to worse, I am okay. The spiritual self of me is okay, and I can radically accept it. And then what do you pray for? You pray for a divine revelation. And you stop going through this attitude of, well, I've got to figure it out. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to go, well, little Greg is going to figure out all the things that he's going to do. I had a friend of mine who wasn't really even in the path of the hurricane who admitted, ruefully, that they spent several days stuck in a consciousness of, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And recognized when it was over, oh my gosh, I could have spent that time lifting up my energy. And during Holy Week, they threw a couple of parties, one indoors, one outdoors. But it isn't that you're supposed to throw a party exactly, but you've got to raise your vibration and your energy, raise your level of vibration and your energy, so that when the time comes for you to meet the circumstance, however it shows up, whether it turns or whether it comes here or whatever it does, you are greater. That power in me is greater than that power that I see around me showing up in all the circumstances. The circumstances don't define you. What defines you? It, them, or I am. I am. The I am that I am. But that doesn't mean that you're supposed to not feel things. You're not supposed to just pretend like it's all okay, even when you radically accept. This is a paradox. You've got to process it. You've got to get those feelings out. You've got to do it. I am dealing, after all these years, with retiring from ministry. This identity is not going to be my identity anymore. And I really believed in that identity because it was something, a vehicle that I would use through time and space to get me through. And it feels like I'm coming out of a chrysalis, but it's very strange I'm letting go of an identity and moving into a new possibility. And for each one of us, we're saying everybody is in that transition in their lives somewhere. You're letting go of an old identity and moving into a new possibility, and you find out that there are resources within you that are greater than anything you had in mind. Well, and you say to yourself, okay, what is my idea of perfection? What is my idea of perfection? Jesus said, be perfect like God is perfect, but God's perfection is constantly in process. It includes the ups and the downs and the good and the bad and the sun shining and the wind blowing and the rain falling and all of it because it's all God. A wonderful expression of this was a man that I knew well. He actually spoke here back 25 years ago, named Walter Starkey. He was the #1 student of a great mystic named Joel Goldsmith. How many people heard of Joel Goldsmith? And Walter Starkey, anybody heard of Walter Starkey? And so what happened was he was a young man, a fairly young man, when Joel Goldsmith passed. And I don't know if you've read Goldsmith, but his writings were very lofty, very absolute, good. It's all good. Just all be positive. It's all very mystical. It's oneness. It's and that's all good. But Walter Starkey, because he was so close to him, and Goldsmith didn't have a family, was brought in to go through his papers and to put Goldsmith's affairs in order when Goldsmith died. And as he did, he found Goldsmith's journals and found all this dark journaling, all this negativity that Goldsmith was offloading into his journals. But Starkey didn't understand that, and he took it very personally. See, today's lesson's about not taking things personally, letting go of the hammer and not taking things personally. So he took it personally, and he said, well, if Goldsmith had these feelings, there's no hope for me. And after he finished going through all these things, he left the spiritual path for about 5 or 10 years, became very materialistic and hedonistic, and just said, there's no hope for me. And then through experience and through opening, he realized that what Goldsmith was doing was releasing the negativity so that he could experience the positivity. You've got to let out those things that are negative in order to embrace the positive. You must embrace things as they are, and part of radical acceptance is letting yourself be where you are and setting down this. This is the hammer of the ego, the hammer that when I'm not perfect as I think I'm supposed to be, with all of my perfect little feelings and all my perfect little thoughts, I whack myself over the head, and we call that spirituality. Instead of doing that, what can I do? Put down the hammer. And I do use it on other people periodically. I also use it on circumstances in life, like my Daffy Duck experience on that hurricane. And then what did I do? I looked inside myself and said, okay, what do I do with this feeling? This unsettled feeling. I didn't try to stuff it down. You journal it out. You let it out. You let those feelings go. You allow yourself to breathe and know that that's part of life. We think we want our life experience to be like highways in the state of Florida. They're always flat. Have you ever driven out past Clewiston? And I'm not talking about the turnpike because it's definitely a bumper car ride out there, but I'm talking where there aren't a lot of cars and it's just straight and you just go and go and go and go. And we think of our lives in an ideal sense as just being flat. But it's no accident that they call somebody in the hospital who's flatlined dead. Because you're flatlined, you're just flat, nothing's going on. I think that the spiritual path is more like Colorado highways. There's ups and there's downs. I don't want to push this analogy too far, but sometimes you got to use the accelerator pedal, sometimes you got to use the brakes or brake with your engine. The accelerator pedal being the prayer, the affirmation, the meditation, the bringing forth the energy and lifting up your energy, and then the breaking is the letting go, the offloading, the journaling, the meditation, the walks in nature, the receptivity, those things that are less active. But we need to have both, and we need to accept and embrace that our lives includes all those things. And so when you go through a hurricane, you don't say, for me to be okay, everything has to be the way I want it. You say instead, there's a power in me that's greater, even than these circumstances. And as I radically accept circumstances, I can embrace them and know what to do when it's time. There's a power within you. There's a resource within each one of us that's pushing out into expression. And when we have these experiences like we've had in the last week, it is custom designed to bring forth in us those radical powers and potentials that can meet the needs in those situations. I went through the earthquake back in 1989 in San Francisco, and I went through a board meeting, and I had given my notice there, and there were some bumpy things that were going to happen in the board meeting, but they didn't happen, thank goodness, because there was an earthquake right before it was supposed to come up. So everybody dove beneath the table, and I was next to one of the board members, and he was a good friend of mine, and I turned to him and I said, "Rate it," when it was over, and he said 7. He was off by 0.1 because he was the chief seismologist of Stanford Research Institute, and CNN interviewed him the next day. He was on TV. But I went through that experience, but one of the things that happened in that was that people, I noticed, rose to the occasion. People rise to the occasion in these, and there is a spiritual component when you're going through something in your personal life that's like that as well. In that earthquake, my sister was home right after it happened. Somebody drove down the street with a bullhorn and said, "Everybody who can get down to the Cypress structure." It was the interstate where it was the first freeway built in Northern California, and before they knew how to build them, so that it collapsed. And it collapsed on the cars that were on the second level. It was a 2-story. And they said, "Come on down there to 7th Street. So my sister was the first person, she said. She got right in her car and went down there. And she said, the only people who were down on 7th Street in Oakland, was where the prostitutes and the drug dealers were. And there they were, rigging block and tackle, bringing out ladders from who knows where, and risking their lives because there were aftershocks and things were still falling, and saving lives." And she said, the bravery and the kindness and the getting outside of yourself, which these were qualities that I did not expect in these individuals. Why? Because there is a power within every one of us. And if it's true for them, it's true for us. And if there's something in your life right now that you're facing, realize that you can handle it differently. And one of the ways you can handle it is not try to figure it out. You can't figure out a hurricane. You can be prepared. I'm not saying there aren't things that you can do, but you can't figure out exactly everything. And so it's very humbling, and it's also a great experience for us to recognize and realize our divine potential. One of the things we can do is say, God, give me a revelation. Give me a revelation. Thank you for a revelation. And sometimes, when we've got something that's unknown that's coming up, and think of something in your life that you'd like an answer on. Instead, don't try to figure it out. Instead, just say, thank you, God, for a divine revelation. Together? Thank you, God, for a divine revelation, and throw that prayer forward and know that you're going to show up in it. I lift this up into my highest possibility. Together? I lift this up into my highest possibility. I go forth to meet my good. Together? I go forth to meet my good. This can only bless me. This can only heal me. Together? This can only bless me. This can only heal me. I'm not saying Pollyanna. I'm not saying that you don't process your feelings. In fact, like Goldsmith, he wrote them all down. That's why he could be so positive. By the way, when I die, nobody's going to find anything like that on me because I burn it or throw it away or tear it up, because why hold on to that garbage? But that served a purpose too, because Walter Starkey, he asked, why didn't Goldsmith write about this? And he realized it's mine to write about it. And he wrote book after book about how in order to embrace your divinity, you've got to embrace your humanity and allow and write out and journal and allow yourself to be wholly, completely human. I mean, that's why the 12-step movement, you start when you admit things exactly as they are. When we're going through one of these times, we can use the spiritual thermometer. You know the spiritual thermometer, and you ask yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, where am I? And if you're in a 2, you would admit it to yourself, and then you ask yourself, where would I like to be? And then feel yourself lifting into that 8 or 7 or even to the 6 if you're having a hard time. but you move with it, you flow with it, and you don't let yourself be stuck in these situations. You allow yourself to radically embrace, radically accept circumstances as they are with an attitude of, I'm going to use the word radical perfection, but it's not perfectionism. Perfectionism is my ego's idea of what's perfect. And it's that flat line. It's everything being exactly the way Greg would like it to be, which is not growthful. Instead, embracing things as they are and letting them be and being willing to be uncomfortable. Being willing to find out what is inside and to put down this hammer that I use on myself and to put down the hammer that I use on others and to put down the hammer that I'm using on the circumstances around me. These situations that come into our lives are designed to do this. Today, this week, is the 10th anniversary of the Shearson Lehman Brothers crash. And when it happened 10 years ago, I was in Detroit. They had been in recession for 9 years. Then that hit. Actually, they'd been in depression at that point for 5 months already. And we could all see something was going to hit. We all knew that. Everybody knew it. And so what came to us, and this is the meditation group that I'm now up in Tarpon Springs, what came to us was to do something called Lift Detroit in Prayer. And it was 21 days of affirming, I lift Detroit in prayer. We reached out to all the spiritual communities, and throughout that city, people got excited about it. I was told by the ecumenical group in the city, you can't do something in 21 days. It will take 2 to 3 years to form the alliances and do the political niceties to make it work. And we didn't have time for it. So we just did it anyway. The money came forth. We printed bumper stickers. I lift Detroit in prayer. They're still on people's cars. It became 10,000 bumper stickers. They were all over, and there was actually a hit record in Canada criticizing it. So it actually did create some controversy. And several years later, I don't know if it's still there, there was a store called the Lift Detroit store with t-shirts and things like that. And then they gave out awards every year, and they did this every year. But I was gone after that. Because at that point, when we came up with this idea, and I contacted all the press, and I was told by the powers that be, you cannot contact the press if you do, because you've never had an experience in a top 10 media market. Well, I'd been in 3 of the top 10, and that wasn't one of them. So I went ahead and did it anyway. I didn't argue, though. I didn't argue. You just do what's yours to do. And we planned this event right at Hart Plaza in the middle of the city. And it went out, and the way it went out was I contacted all the media and got a phone call from the #1 columnist in the newspaper, and she was an agnostic who told me flat out she thought what we were doing was ridiculous at the outset. Why are you doing this? I said, well, we see what's going to happen here. We see what's going on. And you write. I only have prayer. I'm a minister. So this is what we're going to do is pray. And she listened, and she gave us a glowing review. Got all these people to show up. But 3 days before, I had a dream. And the dream was, this is kind of weird, was an underground nuclear test of a H-bomb, and then the fallout was beneficial, was beautiful and filled with light. I didn't know what that meant. We were going to do this outdoors at Hart Plaza, which was like the center of the city. Well, the day of, there was a monsoon. It was huge. And what we found out also was that the Catholic Archdiocese told all of the seminarians they were required to come. So there were 100 priests in training. The imams in all the Muslim temples told their people to come. The inner city churches, the evangelical churches, told their people to come. And it was huge, except for here's the monsoon, and we can't set up. And I look over, and there's this little opening, a little crack under the main part of it, and I go down, and there's an underground bunker with a room for 1,000 people, which is how many showed up. If we hadn't had a monsoon, we would have had 10,000. And that week, Obama stood in front of the sign that was on their big thing, and the governor talked about it. And I mean, it was this really huge thing. And 1,000 people showed up because we were put in this little space. The energy was like a nuclear something. it was powerful, and I truly believe that it helped to turn the tide in the consciousness of people, giving people hope. Now, we don't know, what the results were, but I do know that when I moved out of there, the average home was selling in Detroit for $5,000. That was the average. But within 2 years, their unemployment was lower than the rest of the country. I don't think it's a direct cause and effect, but I do believe that people had hope and people had an upliftment. Just like Jesus, before his Good Friday, he got people's energy up. And in your life, what are you doing to engage with that spiritual something within you in the face of whatever it is that you're looking at in your life, so that you can lift up your energy so that you can embrace it radically, radical acceptance, radical perfection, that you allow things to be as they are and know that the unfoldment of the rose is perfect at every level and stage of its development, from the seed to the bud to the flower, even to the decaying flower. It's all perfection. If you understand that the purpose of your life is not just to flatline and get what you want, but it's to grow you. It's to grow me. Everything that comes into our lives can be embraced in this way. That we can be grown into what? Into what we already are inside. There's already that's inside of you that's calling forth, pushing out, wanting to express. And how do you get in touch with it? Call it forth. Do it in your time of prayer and meditation, yes. But also, as we're doing in our meditation this morning, ask for a divine revelation in the midst of whatever it is. Don't try to figure it out. Don't try to figure out your way through the storm. Certainly you have a rational mind, but there's a time when you let all that go and you embrace that radical acceptance that allows things to be, and then give thanks for that power that will reveal to you what you need to do when the time comes and when you're in the middle of a situation. So this is an opportunity for all of us, and I hope that there's something in your life that you can use this idea of radical acceptance. Today's talk's called You Have a Right, and you have a right to call forth this power, and sometimes it takes something less than ideal or perfect to unveil the perfection that's within, the perfection that you have within your being. So close your eyes and embrace your whole beingness. And whatever is going on in your life, let go of the idea that you're going to figure it out. I do not need to figure this out. None of this. I don't have to figure out anything. Instead, I say, thank you, God, for a divine revelation in the midst of whatever I'm facing in my life. Thank you, God, for lifting this up into its highest possibility. Thank you, God, that I go to meet my good. Thank you, God, that this can only bless me, this can only heal me. Thank you, God, thank you, God. And as I get quiet, I lift up into that real self of me, where the answers come. Thank you, God. So it is. Amen.